Coming up next, Book TV presents Afterwards, an hour-long program where we invite guest hosts to interview authors. This week, Felix Rohatyn, former U.S. ambassador to France, discusses his new book, Bold Endeavors: How Our Government Built America and Why It Must Rebuild It Now. The author examines 10 moments in American history when a presidential decision is said to have transformed the nation. He argues that another such moment is needed today. Mr. Rohatyn discusses his book with Greg Ip, the U.S. economics editor of The Economist.
Welcome to Afterwards. My name is Greg Ip, and I'm the U.S. economics editor for The Economist magazine. And today I'm talking to Felix Rohatyn, who is the author of Bold Endeavors: How Our Government Built America and Why It Must Rebuild Now. Felix, in your career, you've worn a lot of different hats. You've been an investment banker. You ran the corporation that saved New York City from bankruptcy. You've been ambassador to France. But through that whole period, you've been fascinated by infrastructure and the whole notion of public endeavors. Where does this interest come from, and why did you choose now to write a book about some of these historical examples?
Well, I still don't quite know when I started getting really interested in the subject. I think I served in the army in Germany during the Korean War, and when I was discharged, I saw in front of me both the destruction of the war and what was beginning to be the Marshall Plan and the reconstruction of Europe.
Yeah.
And in particular, the work of Jean Monnet and Maurice Schumann about the creation of the European Coal and Steel Authority,
which was the forerunner of the European Union
EU,
today.
Absolutely. And was also, what was even more important, they felt that the creation of that structure would forbid any kind of war breaking out in Europe after that. So in effect, they were using an economic entity that was being created as a way to protect the continent from another war.
And how did you come up with the examples that you chose to write about? There's quite a variety in here, some of which we don't even perhaps think of infrastructure. For example, the Louisiana Purchase or the GI Bill, and then more classic examples like the Erie Canal and the interstate highway system.
Well, I actually thought I was writing about the impact that government can have as an investor.
Yeah.
And I wasn't all that concerned with the exact definition of the term. Actually, at one point I wanted to write about public works, and I didn't think that was going to be anything that was spectacular. But I thought that all I had to do was to write, sort of light sections about individual men, by and large presidents, with the exception of Clinton, of DeWitt Clinton, as having made a personal change as a result of their intervention. And whether that was Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase, or whether that was Teddy Roosevelt with the Panama Canal, my concern was, did such and such a president make a difference in creating this event, and was it worth doing?
Was there anything that surprised you when you were finished this process about what you had learned?
Well, one of the things that surprised me is that the number of people who seem to think that it's a terrible thing to do, to have government get involved in big financing projects. Now, this was before the financial crisis came. But so I didn't think I had to underline the reality of that situation.
And yet, one of the interesting things I found in your book is that this suspicion of large-scale government works is a constant in our history, right? Can you name a few examples where the visionaries you wrote about met cries of, wasteful spending or socialism?
Well, socialism is a term that you do hear a lot.
For example?
Well, for example, we hear it today when we talk about the banking system.
Yeah, but in the course of history, for example, I remember reading in your discussion of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that it was used by a lot of critics, right?
Yes, very definitely. Well, the RFC also had a totally open, how should I say, mission. They could do almost anything. And in addition, they weren't required to go to Congress for money. So they were careful because they knew what a important weapon they were creating.
Mm-hmm.
But first, beginning with Hoover, actually, who created the first RFC,
Yeah.
and his own involvement with the banking system and involvement in business. There was a whole series of things that I read about, but this was over the years. I mean, I didn't sit down and take these 10 projects, and it seemed to me that there were some recurring things. There were, as I said, individuals who did very difficult things. There were people who were terrible crooks. I mean,
Yeah.
the people who did the railroad, the
Yeah.
the transcontinental railroad, were awful, awful crooks. And Lincoln knew it, but he didn't have time to deal with the legal side of this thing because he
Yeah.
was fighting a civil war.
Yeah. But in this country, there is a deeply ingrained suspicion, I think, of a large role for the
Yes.
government in economic life. On net, is that a good thing? But does it sometimes get in the way of positive government action?
Well, you know, my instinct would be to say, no, it's not a bad thing to have the government interested in what's happening.
Yeah.
And then I think of some of the things that were done by the private sector, and
Yeah.
I think you have to kind of surround economic activity with two bookends. One is ethics, and the other is regulation. And if you have those two bookends around a private sector free economy, you come up with the best results. But if you're short one of them, if you have this with no ethical symbolism,
Mm-hmm.
and no, then you begin to see some of the things that we've seen now in the last 15, 20 years. Is if you have a shortage of regulation and if you have a shortage of ethics, you have the worst of everything.
Let's talk about a few of these interesting episodes, especially the period of the railroads. I think was interesting, and the Erie Canal also, because as you're right, Abraham Lincoln was, from his early days in public life, really, really committed to internal improvements, as we called them at the time, the canals and the railroads and so on. Do you see parallels between his interest in that and what Barack Obama wants to do now, especially given that Barack Obama seems to turn to Lincoln for so much inspiration?
Well, I think that President Obama is very conscious of how far behind we've fallen with respect to public investment, and he sees this as something that he can do something about. And as I read the other day, one of the things that interests him is the possibility of creating more investment in high-speed rail.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is something that I welcome.
Yeah.
Also, it's obvious today that the overweighting of the airline industry is arriving at a point where you can't do much more, and we're having a modern, up-to-date, big rapid rail system is something that you require almost, both in terms of comfort, but in terms of reducing the load on the airlines. And so to me, it's and in my 4 years as ambassador to France, I saw every day the benefits of having a really wonderful high-speed rail system. When you go to the railroad station in Paris and you see signs up there saying 2 hours to London, 2.5 hours to Stuttgart, an hour and a half to Brussels.